There was a time when life felt like a quiet melody played on soft piano keys, the kind that filled my small apartment every Sunday morning when sunlight brushed across the curtains. My name is Cassian, and back then, I believed I had everything a man could hope for. I wasn't rich, but I was content. I ran a small architectural design studio from home, and even though it wasn't much, I poured every piece of myself into my work. The highlight of my day, however, wasn't the drawings or the clients, it was Elise. She was the woman I loved more deeply than I'd ever loved anything. Her laughter could melt the frost of the coldest morning, and when she smiled at me, the world felt smaller, simpler, kinder. I used to think love like that was enough to protect us from anything. I was wrong. Sometimes love blinds you so much that you stop noticing the cracks forming right beneath your feet. Elise worked in marketing for a large company downtown, and every day she came home exhausted, tossing her heels aside and wrapping her arms around me like she was finding home again. We'd talk about our dreams, the house we wanted to build, the trips we'd take once my business grew. She believed in me, at least I thought she did. She'd say things like, "You just need one big client, Cassian. Then you'll soar." I held on to her words like scripture, believing she saw something in me worth fighting for. But in hindsight, I realized she was looking for something else entirely. Something I didn't yet have to offer. I was too blinded by devotion to notice her phone lighting up at odd hours, or the way her laughter changed when she was texting someone else. It wasn't the soft, intimate laughter she shared with me. It was lighter, careless, and filled with the kind of joy she no longer showed at home. It started with small absences. She'd come home later than usual, claiming meetings ran long or her boss needed her after hours. I believed her because when you love someone, you don't count their lies. You count the moments you still have left together. But one Friday night, something felt off. She said she was working late again, but her voice carried a nervous tremor. My gut twisted, and for the first time, I followed her. I remember my hands gripping the steering wheel, heart pounding against my ribs as I parked across from an upscale restaurant where I saw her stepping out of a taxi in a crimson dress I'd never seen before. She looked radiant, beautiful, almost otherworldly. But it wasn't me waiting for her inside. It was another man, a man in a tailored suit who kissed her hand like he'd already claimed her. The world tilted that night. The woman I'd built my future around was sharing it with someone else. And in that moment, every soft dream I'd ever had turned to ash. I didn't confront her that night. I drove home instead, numb and hollow, staring at the city lights blurring through my tears. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was work, maybe I misunderstood. But when she returned home hours later, smelling faintly of expensive cologne and wine, she didn't even look guilty. She kissed my cheek, said she was exhausted, and fell asleep beside me as if nothing had happened. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, realizing that the person I loved most had been lying right under the same roof, and yet she was already gone. Over the next few weeks, I tried to find a way to fix things. I thought maybe if I worked harder, made more money, proved myself worthy, she'd see me again. But Elise wasn't slipping away because of what I lacked. She was already running towards someone who promised her more. And that realization cut deeper than betrayal itself. The night everything finally shattered, she didn't even try to hide it. I came home early after a canceled meeting and found her on a video call, her voice soft, her eyes glowing in ways I hadn't seen in months. The man on the other end, Calder, was laughing with her about their plans, about how much longer until she leaves him. I stood frozen in the doorway, listening to my name roll off her tongue like a burden she couldn't wait to drop. When she finally noticed me, the color drained from her face. There was a silence so sharp it almost split the air in half. I didn't yell. I didn't ask why. I simply said, "So this is what my love was worth." She tried to speak, but I walked past her, out the door, and into the night. In that cold air, I decided something. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't chase. I'd make sure that one day she'd look back and realize what she had thrown away. The woman he loved didn't know what I had to offer, but soon she would. The morning after I left our apartment, the world looked unfamiliar, stripped of the warmth I once recognized. I checked into a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, a place that smelled faintly of stale smoke and loneliness. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the cracked mirror, wondering how a man could lose everything without a single warning. My phone buzzed with messages from Elise, apologies, explanations, emotional acrobatics meant to ease her own guilt, but I didn't reply. I wasn't ready to confront her lies with words. Instead, I went silent, letting the weight of her betrayal carve through me. Days passed in a haze of exhaustion and disbelief. I didn't eat much, didn't sleep much either. But in that silence, something began to shift. Anger replaced heartbreak. Determination began to seep through the cracks of my broken pride. If Elise had chosen to leave me for someone like Calder, I would show them both what I was capable of. Not through cruelty, but through success, through transformation. I went back to my studio, the small, cluttered space that had once been my dream. The sketches scattered across the table suddenly looked different. They weren't just drawings anymore. They were reminders of what I'd once been passionate about before love blinded me. I started working day and night, driven by something I couldn't fully explain. I didn't just want to rebuild my life. I wanted to redefine it. My mind, once clouded by Elise's presence, cleared with every design I created. I began sending my work to architectural firms, reaching out to potential investors, people I'd once been too timid to approach. Slowly, the world started noticing me. One of my designs, a minimalist residential project for an eco-friendly housing firm, caught the attention of a well-known real estate developer. Marcus Hale. He called me personally, said my work had a rare kind of honesty. That word stayed with me. Honesty, something I had given freely to Elise, and something she had never truly valued. Marcus offered me a partnership, one that could change everything. I spent months working under his mentorship, learning the deeper layers of business, the contracts, the clients, the art of negotiation. He became the kind of figure I never had in my life, firm, guiding, and quietly wise. "People only see your worth when you stop begging them to," he told me one evening over dinner. Those words hit deeper than he could have known. By the time a year passed, I wasn't the same man who'd walked out of that apartment. My name began circulating in design magazines, my projects featured in architecture expos, and my income multiplied beyond what I'd ever imagined. But none of it filled the void inside me. Each success was a victory, yes, but it also reminded me why I was doing all of this. I wasn't chasing wealth for comfort. I was chasing it as proof. I wanted Elise to see what she had discarded. I wanted Calder to realize he hadn't won. Then, as fate would have it, our paths crossed again. It was at a business gala hosted downtown, a night of glittering lights and expensive wine. I hadn't known Elise would be there until I saw her across the room, her hand resting on Calder's arm, her laughter as polished as her appearance. My chest tightened, but I didn't look away. Instead, I walked in her direction, dressed in a tailored suit, my name now carrying weight in the same social circles she admired. When she finally noticed me, her smile faltered. For a moment, she seemed uncertain, caught between the man she once pitied and the man now standing before her. Calder extended a hand, smug and unaware of the storm that was about to unravel. I shook it, calm and composed, my lips curving into a polite smile. "Cassian Vale," I introduced myself, watching Elise's eyes widen at the sound of my full name, the name now attached to a company that had recently partnered with hers. Fate, it seemed, had a sense of irony. Throughout the evening, our conversations were wrapped in politeness, but beneath every word, there was tension, sharp, electric, and dangerous. Calder spoke confidently about business, about ambition, about how some people never reach their full potential. He didn't realize he was speaking to the very man he underestimated. Elise kept glancing at me, her composure slipping with every passing minute. I didn't need to say anything cruel. My presence was enough. As the night drew on, Marcus joined me and introduced me to a new set of clients. Clients who happened to be potential investors for the very project Elise's firm was bidding on. That's when my plan began to take form. I didn't need to destroy her. All I had to do was let my success collide with her world in a way that made her question every choice she'd ever made. My revenge wouldn't come in loud confrontations or vengeful words. It would come quietly, elegantly, through the undeniable truth of what I had become. When I left the event that night, I felt an unfamiliar calm settle in. It wasn't satisfaction yet, but it was control, something I hadn't felt since the day she betrayed me. The city lights reflected on the car window as I drove home, and I realized that for the first time, I didn't see her as my loss anymore. She was simply a chapter I had outgrown. But deep down, a part of me still wanted her to see it, to face what she'd thrown away when she chose Calder over me. I knew she'd soon find out that the next major project her firm was bidding for was in collaboration with mine. She would have to sit across from me, discuss contracts, and pretend not to remember the man she left behind. And when that day came, she'd see clearly what I had to offer, because this time, I wouldn't be the man begging for her love. I'd be the man she'd regret losing. The day Elise walked into the boardroom, it felt like time had looped back on itself. Only this time, the balance of power was different. She arrived in a crisp navy suit, her hair perfectly styled, her expression professional yet guarded. She had no idea that the firm her company was meeting with belonged to me. The meeting began with formal greetings, and when she finally looked up to meet the lead partner, her breath caught. I sat at the head of the table, calm and unreadable. The room fell silent for a split second as our eyes locked, and I saw it, the flash of disbelief, the subtle tremor in her fingers, the way she tried to compose herself. "Good morning," I said evenly, gesturing for her team to sit. The air thickened with unspoken history. I kept my tone measured, professional. But beneath the surface, every word was laced with the quiet satisfaction of poetic justice. Elise was here to win a partnership from the very man she once dismissed as unworthy. Life, I thought, had an exquisite sense of balance. Throughout the meeting, she tried to maintain composure, presenting her pitch with the same confidence that had once captivated me. But I could see the cracks forming beneath her practiced smile. Every time she addressed me as Mr. Vale, a subtle strain tightened her voice. Calder wasn't present that day, apparently. He was now in charge of a different division, but his shadow hung over her like a curse. I listened carefully, nodded at her presentation, and asked thoughtful questions. There was no anger in my tone, no bitterness. Only control. The more composed I was, the more it unsettled her. When the meeting ended, I stood and extended my hand, watching her hesitate before finally taking it. Her hand trembled slightly. "You've done well for yourself," she murmured, trying to sound unaffected. "So have you," I replied softly. Though some of us had to fall before learning how to rise. Her eyes darted to mine, and for a brief moment, the mask slipped. I saw the guilt there, the recognition of what she'd lost, and that was enough to remind me why I'd chosen restraint over rage. Over the next few weeks, our paths intertwined again as both firms began collaborating on the project. Professional emails, conference calls, and occasional in-person meetings forced us into proximity neither of us could avoid. Elise was different, now colder, quieter, as if life with Calder hadn't turned out as golden as she'd imagined. I learned, through whispers in business circles, that Calder's company had been struggling financially. He'd made risky investments, and his arrogance was beginning to cost him. Elise, once the radiant woman who laughed without care, now carried the weight of disappointment in her eyes. I told myself I didn't care, but part of me couldn't help feeling something shift. I wasn't in love with her anymore, not truly, but I still wanted her to see me, to see what real strength looked like. It wasn't about money or power. It was about self-worth, about reclaiming what betrayal had once stolen. I wanted her to understand that the man she'd left behind had built an empire from the rubble she'd created. One evening after a long project review, Elise approached me outside the office. The parking lot was quiet, the air thick with unsaid things. "Cassian?" she said softly, her voice breaking the silence. "Can we talk?" I paused, studying her. The same woman who once couldn't meet my eyes after lying now looked desperate to find words that could undo the past. "About business or the past?" I asked, my tone calm. "Both, maybe," she whispered. "I made mistakes. I thought I knew what I wanted, but I didn't. Calder isn't. He isn't who I thought he was." I listened, arms folded, letting her speak. She told me how Calder had used her, how he'd cheated, how everything she'd built around him had started to crumble. Her voice wavered, and tears gathered in her eyes. Once that would have shattered me. Now it only made me feel distant. "I'm sorry for what I did to you," she said finally. "You didn't deserve that." I nodded slowly. "You're right," I said. "I didn't. But sometimes we only learn the value of something after it's gone." She looked at me then with the kind of pain I once knew too well, the pain of realizing you've lost something you can never get back. As I drove home that night, I couldn't shake the strange heaviness that followed me. Her apology should have felt like victory, but it didn't. Revenge wasn't the sweet triumph I'd imagined. It was quiet, almost hollow. I thought about how I had built my success not just to prove her wrong, but to heal myself. And yet, even now, with everything I'd achieved, part of me still carried the scars she'd left behind. The difference was that now, I had learned how to live with them. A week later, our project was completed. The deal went through successfully, and Elise's firm benefited greatly from the collaboration. During the final presentation, she avoided my gaze. Her once bright confidence dimmed. As the meeting ended, she approached me one last time. "Thank you," she said simply. I gave her a polite nod, and for the first time, I meant it. I thanked her silently too, not for what she'd done, but for what she had unknowingly made me become. The pain she gave me had turned into the fire that shaped my new beginning. I walked away from that building feeling lighter, as though I'd finally closed a chapter that had haunted me for far too long. That night, as rain tapped softly against my window, I sat with a glass of whiskey and let my thoughts wander. Elise had seen now. She had seen what I had to offer, what I'd built, who I'd become. But I realized something profound. Her recognition no longer mattered. The revenge I had sought wasn't about making her suffer. It was about reclaiming my own self-worth. I didn't need her to validate what I had achieved. I had become whole without her. I opened my laptop and stared at the blueprint of my next project, a foundation for young architects who had once been told they weren't enough. It was my way of giving back, of turning pain into purpose. The woman he loved didn't know what I had to offer, but now she did. And more importantly, so did I. Weeks passed, and life began to feel strangely quiet again. The project that had brought Elise and me back together was finished, and though our paths no longer crossed daily, her presence lingered in the back of my mind like a fading echo. I wasn't obsessed anymore, but there was still unfinished business, an invisible thread tying us together through everything left unsaid. Marcus, my mentor, noticed the weight in my eyes one afternoon as we reviewed new contracts. "You've proved yourself, Cassian," he said, studying me closely. "But the real victory isn't in proving others wrong, it's in letting go." His words struck something deep inside me. I realized that while I had built success, I hadn't truly built peace. There was still a shadow of anger within me, one that whispered every time I thought of Calder. I knew that Elise's betrayal had cut me, but Calder's arrogance, the man who took pleasure in breaking what wasn't his, still lived rent-free in the corners of my mind. I tried to move on, but fate had one last twist waiting for me, one that would show me just how fragile their perfect world had become. It was during a charity gala, a few months later, that I saw Calder again. The event was crowded with influential people, investors, executives, and familiar faces from the industry. Calder looked older, worn out, his charm dimmed by something deeper. He approached me with a forced grin and extended his hand. "Cassian," he said, his tone too casual to be genuine. "You've been doing well for yourself. I've been keeping up with your work." I shook his hand but stayed quiet, watching his facade crack with every word. "You know," he continued, lowering his voice, "Elise and I aren't together anymore. She left. I suppose success changes people." The irony of that statement almost made me laugh. He had taken what wasn't his, used it until it no longer served him, and now stood before me pretending it was fate's fault. "Sometimes," I said calmly, "people don't change. They just finally see who they've always been." His smile faded, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. The man who once thought he had everything now stood before me with nothing. No love, no empire, no control. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The silence between us carried all the weight my words could have held. A week later, I learned through mutual acquaintances that Calder's business had collapsed completely. Fraud investigations, unpaid debts, and lawsuits surrounded him like vultures. Elise, too, was caught in the fallout. Her career suffered after the scandal, her reputation tainted by association. It wasn't my doing. I had stayed out of their world entirely, but destiny seemed to have written a poetic ending on its own. Still, I couldn't help feeling conflicted. Part of me thought I'd feel triumphant, seeing the people who broke me finally crumble. But instead I felt nothing. No joy, no anger. Just a hollow understanding that revenge, in the end, never fills the emptiness left by love. I thought about reaching out to Elise, not to rekindle anything, but simply to offer closure. Yet every time I picked up the phone, I stopped myself. What could I say? "I told you so?" That wasn't who I wanted to be anymore. The man who had once been defined by heartbreak had evolved beyond the need for validation. Then, one evening, as I left my office, I found her waiting outside. Elise stood in the rain without an umbrella, her once polished appearance softened by exhaustion and regret. When she saw me, her eyes welled up. "Cassian," she said quietly. I didn't know where else to go. I hesitated, unsure whether to let her speak or walk away. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "You were right about everything. Calder destroyed everything he touched. I thought I was chasing happiness, but all I did was lose myself. And you. You became everything I always said you would." Her words weren't prideful or manipulative this time. They were honest, stripped bare of pretense. For a moment, I almost felt the old ache of what we used to be. But it wasn't love anymore. It was closure. "I'm not the same man you left," I said softly. "And you're not the same woman I once loved." She nodded, tears blending with the rain. "I know," she whispered. "I just needed you to know that I see it now, what you had to offer. What I threw away." I gave her a faint smile, one that carried both forgiveness and farewell. "Then that's enough," I said. "You don't owe me anything else." She left that night, and I watched her walk away for the last time. No bitterness followed her, only a quiet sense of completion. I realized that revenge hadn't given me freedom, understanding had. The man who once sought to make others regret their choices had finally learned to let go. In the days that followed, I focused entirely on my foundation for young designers, channeling all my energy into building something that mattered. The pain that had once fueled me became my greatest source of empathy. I met people who reminded me of my old self, dreamers dismissed by those who couldn't see their worth, and I helped them rise. Each success story reminded me that the true power of redemption isn't found in vengeance, but in transformation. I wasn't chasing ghosts anymore. I was leading others toward their own light, one blueprint at a time. Years later, I heard Elise had moved abroad, working quietly for a small firm far from the chaos she once loved. Sometimes I wondered if she ever thought of me, but the thought no longer carried pain, just a gentle curiosity. I knew she'd finally found her peace, just as I had found mine. Love had broken me once, but in that breaking, it had also taught me resilience, patience, and the strength to rebuild. I walked through my home one evening, the city lights flickering beyond the glass, and smiled to myself. The woman he loved didn't know what I had to offer, but now she did, and more importantly, I knew it too. Because in the end, the greatest revenge wasn't success, nor was it her regret. It was becoming everything she thought I could never be, and finding that I no longer needed her to see it. That was my freedom. That was my peace. The weeks after Amelia's disappearance felt like walking through fog. The house that once echoed with betrayal now hummed with silence and peace. I had turned my pain into purpose. The day after she left, I donated the house where we'd lived to a charity that helped abandoned spouses start over. Watching those walls being repainted, I felt as though I was painting over my own wounds. The company I had built from nothing was now flourishing, and investors who once ignored me now sought my advice. Yet success no longer felt like revenge, it felt like redemption. I finally understood that healing wasn't about making others pay. It was about reclaiming the pieces of yourself they tried to destroy. One morning, as the sun poured golden light over my office, my assistant told me someone was waiting outside. When I looked up, Amelia stood there thinner, pale, and clearly broken. Her designer clothes couldn't hide the desperation in her eyes. "Cassian," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I made a mistake." I studied her quietly, not with anger, but with a calmness that surprised even me. "You made many," I replied, my tone steady. "But the biggest one was thinking I needed you to complete me." She tried to speak, tears spilling down her cheeks, but I turned my gaze toward the window where the city stretched endlessly, a symbol of freedom, of second chances. "I wish you peace, Amelia," I said finally, "but your chapter in my story is over." She left without another word, her footsteps fading like a memory that had finally learned to let go. Later that evening, I visited my old neighborhood, the place where everything had begun. Children ran through the streets, laughter filling the air, and the scent of street food mingled with the cool night breeze. I stopped at a small cafe I used to visit when life was simpler. The owner, an elderly man with a kind smile, greeted me like an old friend. As I sipped my coffee, I reflected on how far I'd come, from the man who was once humiliated to the man who found peace through resilience. It struck me that the truest revenge was never in retaliation, it was in survival, in building something so strong that the people who once tried to destroy you can only watch from a distance. That night, I walked along the quiet streets with a strange sense of serenity. The stars above felt closer, brighter, as if the universe was finally acknowledging my journey. My phone buzzed with a message from Ava, the woman who had stood by me when everyone else doubted. "Dinner tomorrow?" She had written, followed by a simple heart. I smiled, not because I had found love again, but because I was finally ready to let love find me. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing closure. I was living it. As I stood there, a cool breeze brushed past, carrying whispers of the past that no longer haunted me. I realized something profound, that pain, betrayal, and heartbreak were never the end of the story. They were the fire that forges strength. I looked up at the sky, whispered a silent prayer of gratitude, and walked forward, leaving behind every shadow that had ever tried to hold me back. The road ahead was uncertain, but for once that didn't scare me. It thrilled me, because I had learned that true power isn't in what you lose, it's in who you become after losing it all. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. Tell me in the comments. What would you have done if you were in Cassian's place? Your thoughts might inspire our next story. Until next time, stay strong, stay true, and never forget. Sometimes the best revenge is becoming everything they said you couldn't be.